Hello everybody, welcome back to Throttle Grotto, the Mr. Irrelevant of YouTube. We're modifying a fuel tank. Yep, a used one. Stay tuned. All right, this episode is going to blow up. No, it's not. None of my episodes blow up. Anyway, I pulled the Rabbit fuel tank out, which was less fun than I remember it being. Because of the 2.5-inch exhaust, I didn't have room to just drop the fuel tank straight down. And since this is an aftermarket fuel tank, doesn't fit perfect, but it's what we have to work with. So I did get in the Mk4 fuel ring from S&P, which is this guy right here. So you can see it's steel and it's designed to weld onto a tank. And then it takes the threads from a Mk4 plastic lock ring to hold the fuel pump in. Well, I don't have the fuel pump yet. I went to pick a part to get one. They wanted $40 for a used housing and a questionable pump. And I was able to buy one online for $40 brand new. So I have that coming and an AEM fuel pump coming. But the first stage is to get this thing mounted on the tank. All right, so one of the things that's going to have to happen is I already drew kind of approximately where the hole I made in the car was. So I'd kind of have a reference as to where the fuel tank sits underneath the back seat, or where the back seat is supposed to be. And I'm going to have to make that hole a lot bigger because this kind of fills this whole void here. Now, yeah, this is a much larger setup than the stock Rabbit stuff, which you can see here is this. And this is an aftermarket pump that was supposed to flow, it was supposed to put out 340 liters per hour. Significantly larger than the Cabriolet stuff, which is why we have to enlarge the hole both in the car and in the fuel tank. And then I'm also going to have to shape some of this metal because, as you can see here, it's not all flat. So I'm going to hammer and dolly this area back up to meet the tank. And then over here, oh my God, over here it's going to have to get crafty. So what I'll probably have to do is leave some metal inside here so that I can stretch that up and meet that. Before I do this, yes, working on an old fuel tank is extremely sketchy. I know that. So before I do any welding, we're going to put more water in the tank so that I have little to no ability of fumes in the tank while I'm welding on it, because the water doesn't care if I weld. But I've washed out the tank, let it sit in the sun for like 2 or 3 days. I don't smell fuel at all anywhere near the tank. So that is good. Like, I can stick my nose down in here. I don't smell fuel at all. So if you're going to do this, please be safe, please be smart. If you think you need to replace your tank, I would say just buy a new tank and then put a new tank into this project and then throw the old tank away. So yes, grinder sparks can also cause explosions, which would make my channel blow up. Okay, because I'm a smart person, I bought 2 different colors of Sharpies. Bought a red one for doing this kind of stuff, and then I used a black one to mark where the inside of the car problem is. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a ring here in red to show how big that hole has to be. And you can see it did a pretty good job up here of matching up where the black line is on the tank, like right here. So I'll only have to cut back a bit. Okay, so I used the blue Sharpie to go around the outside of it, and I didn't quite do a good enough job back here. But this will let me know about where the ring and everything is going to stick up. As long as I get everything will be tucked inside of this outer flange. So I have to get everything, so it has to be flat all the way to this outer flange, and then it has to be cut back to the red circle. All right, for this I'm going to use my little body saw. All right, now that I've completely aerated the fuel tank, you can see it's a really clean tank inside, hardly any rust at all. So the other thing that's going to have to happen is this cup's going to have to come out. This baffle, the Mark IV tank doesn't have a baffle in it, and the whole tank pump, all that assembly will run directly into the side of that cup right there. So I will have to take all of that out as well. So I'm going to try to flatten out a few of these ridges that you can see in the tank. And you can see I left a little bit extra on the bottom there. Hopefully I can stretch this metal enough that I can make this mostly flat. All right, so here is what we have. Well, let me back up. All right, here is what we have. We have a ridiculous mess now in the inside of the tank, but I was able to cut this down a lot. I had to use, pretty smart here, I had to use my cutting wheel, so I was able to get into the tank with worn out cutting wheels. So sometimes it's actually smart to keep these old cutting wheels around, the half-size ones. So I was able to do that. And then I came in with my little Scotch-Brite wheel and kind of worked my way around just to make sure that there wasn't a really sharp lip or any kind of stuff on there that would catch, or break off. And I'll probably come around it, just around the outside of it with a file, just to make sure that everything is, all the swarf or whatever you call it is off of there. And then I also got smart, which is not like me. And instead of bringing everything up, I decided to bring everything down. So I was able to smash all this stuff down, and I did have to make a couple of little pie cuts here to make this stuff fit. So I'm going to weld these up before I clamp the ring back on here. But you can see I'm going to have to go really slow and kind of it's not perfectly flat, but with going around, and so I'll have to move the clamp, do a little bit of welding, move the clamp all the way around, and it'll be a little bit of a process to get that welded on there, and I'll probably have to trim with like a angle grind or with the die grinder, that guy. I'll have to trim a little bit inside here to clean up the hole. But I think we're at the point where we can start welding. Oh, and since I was in here creating sparks and like using the angle grinder and the die grinder, I didn't have any ill effects from that. So I'm not going to worry about filling the tank with water, but I am going to vacuum it out and once I'm all done and rinse it out with something to get all the garbage out of it so I'm not ruining a fuel filter. Okay. All right, here's what I have. You can see I've got some gaps to fill here, but for the most part, it sits pretty well. It sits really nice and flush right there. The rest of it, I didn't metal work as well as I probably could have, but so yeah, you can see along the back, I've got a little bit of gap to fill across the back here, but that's where I'm at. So I'm going to get started. Okay, so the fuel ring is in the car or in the tank now. I did not die, which is good or bad, depending on how you look at it. So, things not to do. Wrap your ring. Wrap your whatever you're welding in blue tape, because when it gets hot, it just leaves a pile of residue on there that you have to spend a bunch of time scraping off. Fortunately, it does not affect how the ring threads on to the tank, which is good. It did make things a little more sticky. I tried wire wheeling some of this off. It didn't want to come, and then it stayed stuck to my hands for hours. I mean, if I had died, engagement would have been through the roof. People would watch this video time and time again. I'd get rebroadcast on a whole bunch of news channels. Think of the views. I'm sure that the dive welders that watch my channel for tips and tricks are going to start calling me endlessly for job opportunities based on my stellar performance here. I'm going to cover up all these job opportunities I'm going to get with some JB tank weld. Mostly because I have no idea if I have any pinholes in any of these places where I have let a penguin defecate on my fuel tank. So I am going to back it up with this stuff, fuel resistant epoxy. It's just like quick steel, but it is made for fuel tanks, metal tanks, potable water tanks, etc., etc. Also ethanol resistant. So I'm going to mash a bunch of this stuff up and mash it around the tank, and then that is pretty much done. All right, now that I've done all that, will the fuel pump actually fit in the tank? As you can tell, this is pretty long, but it does have some compressibility, which is good because this tank is not quite deep enough for all of this. Oh, this is a good sign. Well, it goes in, doesn't come back out. Okay. Okay, so one of the things we have to figure out is what are we going to do about the float. So I'm going to simulate this real quick. If the pump is compressed all the way, let's see if I can, there we go. So if the pump is compressed and the float is at the top, or it would show full, it's actually not going to show, it'll never show full, it'll only show half full. So I've got to modify the float a little bit. All right, this is what I came up with. Straightened out this arm, so it's pretty much sitting at the bottom, and then just moved the float down around and then bent this up so that the float won't come off. And then when it pivots up, it's still out of the way of the float, or it doesn't impede the float to the top of the tank. So I took measurements and I wrote them on there so I can remember later. It's 50 ohms for empty, 290 ohms for full, so that way I can program my fuel gauge appropriately. Okay, so anytime you're working on a fuel system, you obviously want a perfectly clean surface because you don't want to contaminate anything. That might give you problems down the road where you have to take the fuel tank out and do this procedure all over again. That'd be terrible. Anyway, these pumps come out pretty easily once you have the whole basket assembly out. It's just these 4 screws here that hold this cover on. If I remember how these things come apart from my experiences in the past. So that separates the fuel sender. And then we have this little basket here that pops apart. There we go. And there's our fuel pump in this little handy holder. All right, so now we have access to our generic fuel pump made of pure Chinesium. And we're going to replace it with this guy, this AEM 51000, which probably makes 1,000 horsepower. According to the rating online, it was rated to 340 liters per hour, and that's what we need. We need 340. And there's all kinds of things in here that we probably won't end up using. Oh, look at that. 340 liters per hour. So comes with a clip that automatically tells me, even though the pump is labeled positive on this side, this tells me that I'm working with a positive scenario. Yeah, so the pump does fit on that little strainer down there. So there is some filtration before it goes into the pump that way. So the next step that I need to do, I need to modify this wiring. So you can see here, the wiring is just held in up here with it's got a solder to a clip. And I've got plenty of harness to use here. So all right, so part of that was a non-success and I needed to do it off camera. What I ended up doing was using the original wires because I couldn't get the AEM wires through the holes in the pump. So I soldered the connectors to the spades. and then just soldered these together. And now I just need to put my heat shrink over these, and then I can put the pump in and put it all back together. And then put it in the tank, and then put the tank in the car, and then hope it works. All right, I skipped a whole lot of steps trying to get this into this car, but here we go. I have the Mk4 pump, lines, and filter, plug, all that stuff in the car. It has fuel in it. I did have to lengthen the hard plastic lines on the pump right there because the stock lines that I got weren't long enough to go from there to the filter, but I was able to make them work by using some 1/4-inch barbs and a heat gun, and was able to make connections that seem to be working. So, oh yeah, the 928 is back from Griot's. It's had its stay in company of cars nicer than itself. Yeah, the other thing I was going to show you was, so I figured out 2 problems I had with this. One is this line decided to pinch itself on the installation. You can see here that so the fuel pump pulsing was like, I don't know if you guys remember that noise, but I think that's what the fuel pump pulsing was. Those are hooked up right. I did have the filter hooked up right, which is one of the things that I was worried about. But now, if I hit the key, I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but there we go. It doesn't pulse anymore. Loads right up with that. There we go. Don't have any leaks. All right, I took it for a quick test drive and everything seems to be working. I still do smell a little bit of fuel in the car, but I've got this weird popping noise that's coming from somewhere over here. It's like a pop, 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 while it's idling. So I have no idea what that is. It's always something. All right, everyone, I'm tired. I'm beat. I've had less fun than I really wanted to putting this back together, but I'm happy it's working. And it seems we've eliminated at least one problem going on with the car, which was fuel delivery. So if you want to take on this project, buy a new fuel tank and hit up S&P for one of their adapter rings and go for it. So that's all from Throttle Grotto. Until next time, get out there and work on something.